Hello and welcome to the Purdue Basketball Beat. I'm Michael with Anish and a special guest today, Nathan Baird. How you doing, Nathan?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much for coming on our show. I don't know what Anish did to blackmail you to convince you to appear on the show.
Very nicely, and I was glad to come. It's nice to finally meet. These Twitter is such a strange social meeting place now for these. There are these names that you see every day that are just like scrolling through your life, and it's interesting to finally put names and faces and personalities to that profile that just kind of is always in your face.
Calling Twitter strange might be the nicest thing anybody's ever said about Twitter.
And now you have like a face to put with the that guy. That's the guy I put on mute.
Yeah,
Okay.
when you inevitably unfollow both of us, that's now you'll know. Now this is
Now you'll know. But now that he's seen our faces, maybe he'll like be struck with like pity when it comes to the unfollowing, and maybe we'll just get put on mute.
maybe the mute's a nice function now.
That camera's being unfollowed back. See, that's a problem. So. Anybody who I'm already following is probably safe.
Hey, you should go follow Nathan. What's your Twitter handle?
At NBAIRDJC.
NBAIRDJC. Cool. You should go follow him because you're very good. You're very good when you cover Purdue, and it's great.
So we want to talk to you a little bit about how did you come? How long have you been on the Purdue beat? What have been your responsibilities over your career? Like, how have you sort of gotten to this point?
Yeah, so I came here to the Journal and Courier in 2005 as the high school sports coordinator. Basically, the only person whose full duties were covering high schools, and I did that until I guess September, October of 2013. Basically 2 days after practice started for that 13-14 season, we had some changes from in our staff, and I got the sort of battlefield promotion, I guess, onto the Purdue basketball beat, and so I've been doing that now. This is my third season covering Purdue men's basketball.
So it's a bit of a change from following the covering high schools to Purdue. Has it been sort of interesting seeing some of the kids that you follow during the high school season, like matriculate up to the next level? Like, who have you sort of seen over the years?
At the high school level, obviously I covered some of the kids that came, the anthropes that came through. I covered Andy Day when he was at West Lafayette. I got here after Bobby Rydell had already come through. I'm trying to think just in terms of
the legend.
Purdue.
Bobby Bucket.
Bobby
Bucket, yeah. We're cleaning out our office right now because we're going to be moving buildings here in a couple months. And Sam King found an old book, I guess you would call it, a pamphlet. I don't know, that someone had written something about the legend of Bobby Buckets or something like that. It's Bobby Rydell biography kind of thing.
I will pay cash money for a biography of Bobby Buckets.
You might be able to pay the new mortgage of the place by just eBaying that thing. And, yeah.
Yeah, it has been interesting because this area when I came here, I was intrigued because I think this area has a good sports history. When I was coming here to do high schools, let alone what goes on here at Purdue, but I came here because I thought it would be a place that would have intriguing storylines to follow and good teams, and that pretty much bore out. I mean, I was only here a couple months, and I was covering Central Catholic girls winning a state championship in basketball, and just kind of built from that. So it's been an interesting place to follow sports because it's really ingrained here. I think Purdue has a lot to do with that, but obviously these high schools have a long history too.
So where were you before you came up to West Lafayette?
So I grew up in Central Illinois. Around Danville, if you guys know, if you just take I-74 straight across,
Oh, yeah.
once you get past the Beef House, but before you get to Champaign, there's Danville. and outside of that, I grew up a really little town outside of that, and worked there a little bit after high school. Was going to community college there. Decided to go back to school full time. So then I moved to Chicago. I went to school at UIC, and I worked at the Tribune while I was up there in various capacities for 4 or 5 years. So I came here from working, doing mostly high school sports stuff and occasionally some other things for the Tribune.
Interesting. So you probably follow this basketball team as close as anyone in the business. Like, what has been your early impression? Well, I guess not early. Season's already in February. But what has been your impression of this team this year, especially compared to the real ups and downs of last year?
You know, somebody asked me last week, like, what grade would you give this team? And this is obviously before the Michigan State game. And I was kind of put on the spot because I hadn't really thought about a letter grade for this team. And I think I said B+, but really that's probably too harsh. I think this is, you know, I know that they've lost a couple games that they feel like they shouldn't have against what happen to be some of the best teams in the country, and then obviously the big stumble at Illinois. But I think you'd have to call this a successful season so far, especially because I think this team still has a lot of growth, and I think there's still time for that to happen. It's not that urgent. I know we're getting towards the end of the season, but you're still seeing, you know, you've seen the promise of what Caleb Swanigan can be and still some of the drawbacks, and can he get, you know, to another level this season? You've seen Vince Edwards take this sort of jump here a few weeks ago, and is that something he can sustain going forward? You know, just little things like that. Like, is there still another level for this team to push up to this season? But I think for the most part things have gone about how you would expect. I think some things have come and gone as far as the three-point shooting that maybe they thought would be more consistent. But you know, overall, I think what's happened so far has been about what they expect. I don't know that they're going to be able to compete for a Big Ten championship now, especially because that Illinois loss, I think, really hurts them there. But there's still a lot that I think could potentially be accomplished by this team. It's going to be interesting to see, like I said, just kind of what growth can still happen between now and that second week of March when they're playing in the NCAA tournament.
What was your preseason expectation for them? I mean, but I'd actually say a B+, A- is nicer than most people. Well, so a lot of people were frustrated with the Butler loss. I'd float between a B+. Like, I'd say B+ is pretty fair. But that Butler loss is frustrating. You know, Butler always gives Purdue fits, unfortunately. That Illinois loss isn't great. And Iowa, I mean, like, as, you know, Iowa would get my hypothetical vote for number one team in the country just because of their resume right now. Yeah. But nobody saw Iowa coming. So, you know, though we have 5 losses that are kind of explainable outside of that Illinois loss, what was your expectation? Like, did you see a Big Ten title possible? Did you see Purdue finishing, I don't know, top 3 in the Big Ten? Do you think that we will finish top 3 and a favorable seed in the NCAA tournament?
I'm trying to think back to our season preview exactly what I said, because I did put in there an actual prediction, and I think I said 27 wins, and that I thought this would be a second weekend NCAA tournament team.
Okay.
And because I thought going into the season that the floor was high for this team, just because there was so much talent, they were going to be able to do some things with the depth. There were teams that just weren't going to be able to match up with what they could do in the front court, and that was going to take them a long way. And now, as far as how high the ceiling was going to be, that was trickier, just because there still were question marks out there as far as the guard play, as far as you know, what you saw in the second half from A.J. Hammonds. Would you see that for a full season? How would Swanigan fit in, especially because he was coming in a little bit late into the process, and they were going to be playing in a different way. That changes things for Edward. I mean, as you guys know, there were just a lot of things that were still to be resolved. So, but I thought and still think that, you know, I still would see kind of that same projection as kind of the minimum of this team. And I think that's where they would set, you know, if they're not getting through that first week into the NCAA tournament, they would probably consider this season a disappointment, because I think they feel like they're definitely good enough to beat whatever team that they would get paired with the kind of seed that they're expecting. And then I think they feel like as they showed the other night, they can go up against a team, and I think they even showed it against Maryland. They just didn't finish it off. They go up against one of the better teams in the country and potentially win that game. So, they're as far as I think they're pretty much on schedule with what I expected before the season. But I still think that the ceiling of this team, I guess, would still be somewhat hard to see, just because there does seem to be just another issue kind of pops up here and there, and when are they going to kind of break through and be able to put away a game like what they had the other night?
So how much do you think last year's loss to Cincinnati sort of hangs over this team? I mean, is it a source of motivation, or is it?
I would say more of a source of motivation than anything. I don't know that necessarily hangs over the team. They in a lot of ways they felt not that they exceeded their own expectations, but they exceeded outside expectations last season by being tied for third in the Big Ten and having the kind of season they did. And this year, though, it's just the perspective changes, because now you have all these people coming back, and you're adding a talent like Swanigan, and the expectations change. Now you're seen as a team. Well, now you're supposed to be at least that good, if not even better. You're supposed to be able to get farther than that, because that accomplishment has happened. How are you going to build off of that? So I don't know that it's necessarily something. I've never gotten the impression that it lingers over them. I know that it's one of those things that, and Matt Painter said this in an interview I did last summer, that you never forget your losses. Your losses really do kind of hang over you. I think he was talking more from the perspective probably as a coach who probably feels more responsible for the losses than he does for the wins in some way. And I think that's true not just for Painter, but for a lot of coaches. But kids, the younger you are, I think you're probably the more resilient you are, and I think it's going to help them this season knowing that, okay, we've been in that situation before. We know what went wrong. How do we approach that better the next time? I know that hasn't necessarily borne out throughout this season. There's been a couple of situations that have recurred as far as not finishing off these games late, but it's all part of the experience. It's all part of sort of growing and building off of each week. So we'll see. I think it's experience is only going to help them, having been through it. That for myself, that was my first NCAA tournament experience too. So I'm going into it's a completely different world being in those scenarios. They're trying to have we're trying to do interviews with Purdue players while Kentucky's practicing, and you can just hear these roars coming out of the gym that's full of these rabid Kentucky fans. It's just a different situation than you experience any other time of the season. So it should help them this year. I think having even if it was a loss, the experience alone should help them this season.
So along with that experience, what about this team is different than last year? From is it the mental toughness? Is it the added dimension of Swanigan? How has this team evolved since last year?
I think you've seen a lot of individual involvement.
Evolution.
A lot of individual development, and that all kind of builds towards what the improvement of the team as a whole. What you've seen from P.J. Thompson this season, I think, has really surprised people. The fact that he's just been so reliable from a ball security standpoint, especially, and helping instigate things offensively. Rafael Davis, I know it hasn't been consistent, but you've seen some more offensive growth. I think you've definitely seen improvement from Isaac Haas, and I know he hasn't necessarily been able to show it as much because of the minutes situation, but to me, he's night and day a better player than he was last season. He was pretty good in the first half of last season, but offensively, you don't see him running into some of those same kind of silly fouls and mistakes that he was kind of plagued by last season. You can find other examples too. I mean, I think you've even seen better from AJ because although he had the misstep at the beginning of the season, I think it's been a more consistent performance. It didn't have to wait till mid-season for him to kind of be pushed and come around. So there's been just a lot of small things that this team has gotten better with, and that's what I think is intriguing about college sports. I mean, you only get 4 years with these guys at most, and it's do things, do the right guys improve at the right rate and get better in the right ways and have it all sync up at the right moment. Matt Painter talks a lot about how matchups are so crucial for the NCAA tournament, but the other half of it is like, does everything just kind of come together? Does the team sort of come into its own and seize that moment? That obviously remains to be seen.
So what is on the does this team need to do to have everything sort of come together? What's missing? Is it the play of Swanigan, or is it the outside shooting becoming more consistent?
Though, obviously both of those will help. I think it's the Swanigan thing is tough because there have been times this season you guys have seen where he clearly can be such a force. I mean, as bad, I know he had 6 turnovers last night, but he also has 2 huge baskets at the end of regulation. That this game maybe doesn't go to overtime last night without Caleb Swanigan, and what he does rebounding for this team, it can't be ignored either. I mean, he really sets a tone out there a lot of nights. So he's still a bit enigmatic as far as what you're going to get from him on any given night, but at the end of the day, it's usually still a positive, I think, for this team.
If he wasn't a 5-star, do you think he would bear the same criticism that he gets at times? Are expectations set maybe too high for him? I mean, because he also classified up a year. I mean, he's
right.
Pretty young.
He classified up a year, but it classified him up to what his age would be.
True.
So I think age-wise, I think he's where he's supposed to be. You can argue about as far as another year of high school development, I suppose, but I think obviously the expectations are a little higher. You've seen that with AJ Hammonds too. When you're 7 feet tall and you come in and people are expecting you to just be this dominant force right away, and it obviously took him a while to get to a level where he can consistently be that. I think it probably has affected the expectations people have, but I also think if you're turning the ball over 6 or 7 times a game, you're going to rightly be criticized. I don't care how many stars were next to your name or what grade you had, and he'll be the first to admit that too. And when you take some of the shots that he's taken here in the last couple weeks, so. But he's coming around, and the thing is, as you guys have heard, I mean, I've written about it, other people have written about it. Nobody's going to work harder to get better on a daily basis than this kid. I mean, everybody on the team, everybody around the program just raves about how he's always in the gym. Many times where I've just walked by at Cardinal or walked by Mackey going from one place to another before a game or interviews, and he's in there shooting around. So that's what's really intriguing about him is how good he is now and how good, I mean, at any time, we've seen this before. Like I said, we saw it earlier, I thought, this season with Vince Edwards, where it seemed like a light bulb just kind of came on, and for the next, whatever it was, 2 weeks, he was really a force. He was a different kind of player than we'd seen him be before. And if that light bulb goes off for Swanigan before the NCAA tournament, this team could, I think, do some pretty special things.
Okay, a different version of that question would be, do you think that the high-profile nature of his recruitment is kind of keeping Painter from using the bench as a motivating factor? Because he seems to, I mean, like, I'm a huge Biggie fan. I love him. I think he's one of the maybe 5 best defensive rebounders in the country. I think he's definitely the best rebounder in the Big Ten. And so having that guy crash the glass along with AJ and Vince is great. But some of those threes in the second half. That sure he might have that shot in his arsenal, but not for the last 2 months. Some of those turnovers, it passes that he's flubbing here and there. Do you think it's stopping Painter from having all of the tools at his disposal?
Well, obviously you have some options with this lineup if you want to do that, and I'd asked him about that earlier this season. Like, at some point, do you just bring him off the bench or whatever? And I go back to last night's game, I'd have to check, but I think he set for the last 3 or 4 minutes of overtime, if I'm not wrong.
He did. Vince was. I liked that lineup actually. Yeah. Vince was at the 4. A lot.
Klein in at the 2 as well.
Right. And now the thing is, though, as you were just saying, that there's obviously a trade-off there. You're taking off potentially the best rebounder on this team, I think, no question, and one of the best in the Big Ten. And I know that Vince Edwards is a pretty good rebounder, but still, I mean, every time you make a switch like that, you're giving something away. So it has to be the right scenario. I think the way that things were playing out last night, it made a lot of sense. He wanted, you know, Edwards could handle the situation at the 4 last night. It was going to, and it probably helped you defensively too with that matchup. That's where he still probably needs to actually make the most growth. I know the turnovers have been an issue, but I really like to see him be more reliable defensively. But at the same time, that's not completely fair. He's had some really tough matchups. I mean, there's a lot of people that have trouble when they have to guard Jared Utoff.
Which is a weird decision in and of itself, just to put him on Jared Utoff, but
it's a pick your poison thing.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that.
So is keeping Biggie at the 4, is that something that has played out as well as you can expect, or should they maybe look at putting him back in at the 5? Is his natural position? His natural position in high school was the 5, but his natural position in the NBA might be a 4. He's sort of stuck in between. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that means you're giving one of the 2 best centers in the Big Ten a lot less minutes too. I mean, again, like I said, like every situation, there's a pro and a con to it, and I'm sure Matt Painter has looked at every angle of it. The good thing is, like as we saw last night, you can get still a big rebounding force out of Swan. I know he had 4 rebounds last night, but a lot of times, he's good for 8, 10 rebounds.
Purdue is such a better team rebounding. Like the team rebounds are off the charts when he's on the floor. So
right.
I think that's fair.
Right. What I think is, it's what you have to remember is, it's like I said, it's still a development. Even when you go out there and you have X number of turnovers or you make a couple bad decisions, and I feel bad because we keep bringing up those things as if he's not almost averaging a double-double and hasn't been picked in the week 3 times, and is a pretty decent chance he'll be all freshman team, all that stuff. He's going to be in the NBA someday. So all that stuff needs to be said. But I mean, every time a guy struggles, and we don't have to say this about Swanigan. You could say this last year about Isaac Haas. You could say this 2 years ago about AJ Hammonds. Hopefully there's a lesson that's being learned there, and hopefully that a week from now, I'm thinking just as a coach, a week later now my player is better in some way from that. So again, he's a really smart kid. I know it hasn't been as consistent as what people had hoped for probably, and maybe that's where that kind of 5-star expectation comes in. But we've all seen how good he is. I mean, and how good he will be. It's just a matter of how soon does he get there.
So it definitely seems like Painter is willing to put the time investment into guys like Swanigan and Klein now, with perhaps the hope of it paying off in March if these guys have been given the opportunity to work through some of the mistakes early.
Yeah, I think there's some of that, although I think that was a stance he might have taken more a couple years ago, but he got away from that a little bit last year, as some of us had written about. He came out and said, I was playing too many guys, I had to cut that rotation back, and when he did, that's things really took off. When you had Octius started playing 30 minutes a game, you could see, like, there's almost a cut point in the season. That's when this team became one of the better teams in the Big Ten. So, and this is a coaching staff, from everything I've seen these couple years, where what you earn is kind of what you get. I mean, if you're the guy who's supposed to be playing, you're the guy who will get the nod. So there is some of that teaching that's going on, but there's a lot at stake right now in terms of the Big Ten tournament seed, in terms of sometime your NCAA tournament seed. So as we've seen, there's other nights where maybe Klein or Matthias or Stevens, obviously, now that he's back with the team, where the minutes are short, and that's just kind of how it is right now. I think they're going to do what they need to do on any given night to win.
So it seems like there are 4 people entrenched in the lineup, that the necessary lineup. So it's been P.J. Thompson, Vince Edwards, Ray Davis, and Caleb Swanigan. And it looks like Johnny Hill is fairly safe in his spot. He's going to be getting around 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes per game. And it looks like Isaac Haas, just because AJ can't play 40 minutes, Isaac Haas is going to get, something like 10 minutes per game. But that wing rotation is what really like interests me, because it doesn't seem like anybody, for one reason or another, like Matthias seems to be hitting the sophomore wall. Klein is such a liability on the defensive end, and Stevens has been going through what he's been going through. Like, that's awful. But there hasn't been anybody that's kind of leapt up and taken that. So how do you see that position going?
Yeah, I think that's been the one place where they've maybe been a little bit surprised that has been more a liability than they thought. Now, again, to be fair, all those guys have at some point this season stepped up and been the reason why Purdue won a game, and whether it was Klein hitting those threes against Pittsburgh, or Matthias hit some big shots against Wisconsin, and Kendall's had his moments too. And at any given night, he's a guy who's could hit 6 or 7 if the minutes are there. I mean. It's just a matter of consistency, and I think that's what they've been a little bit disappointed by. Especially we've seen where wing defense has been an issue with this team. Again, to be fair, that sometimes you're playing a team that has 2 or 3 really good guys out there on the perimeter, and you've got to pick your poison the same way teams do when they play Purdue. But it is something that I've talked to them about not that long ago. They're addressing it. It's just a matter of how soon do you get the problem corrected. I think what's interesting is last night, Klein ended up playing more minutes in the second half than Matthias in overtime. So last night, for whatever reason, what they saw, what was happening on the floor, what they saw in the matchups, that was what they thought was a better situation for Purdue. And I think on any given night, that's going to change. Somebody was asking me about it on Twitter today, and I was like, I don't know what to tell you necessarily, because I think it could completely switch itself. Dakota Matthias for some reason could play 30 minutes against Michigan on Saturday, and it wouldn't surprise me, because that's just how things will maybe play out that game. It's supposed to be a strength for this team. It's supposed to be that whatever guy is working that night, this team has the depth and the versatility to make that work. And maybe that will be a strength at the end of the day. Maybe it won't. But I do think they do want to see some more consistency, especially exactly what you're talking about as far as getting more consistency from the wings on defense.
So just a quick follow-up on that one. How many minutes is Kendall ready to play?
That's a great question, and I didn't know if he would play any last night. It was still kind of uncertain when we had talked to Painter earlier in the week. He wasn't practicing at all during that stretch. You got to remember, this is a tough time for. They're glad to have him back, but it's tough for him to come back in this stretch of games and just get some of those minutes to just kind of work his way back into things, because like I said, the stakes are really high right now. You're playing, the number 2 team in the country in Maryland. You're playing another top 10 team in Michigan State. You're playing a pretty good team coming up Saturday on Michigan. Not to take anything away from the rest of the Big Ten, who they might have played instead in that stretch. But if they'd been playing Minnesota and Rutgers this week, Kendall might have gotten more playing time in the 2 games he's been back. So that's probably been a factor here too. I think conditioning is a factor, and I guess probably just him, where he's at. We haven't had a chance to talk to him yet, but he's, like you said, he's had a tough time in the last month or so, and I think they're the other, like we were just saying, the versatility and the depth of this team allows them to kind of work him back in at the pace that's right for him and right for the team.
So I think at times it's tempting to get upset about, or Purdue fans at least have been upset about how this team has played against Iowa or Butler or Illinois. However, overall, and you touched on this team is doing pretty good. This is if you would have told me at the beginning of the season that this is where Purdue would be at, I'd be very happy. And to sort of drive that point home, compare and contrast this team to the first Purdue team that you followed back in 2012, 2013. What are the changes that you've noticed, either in the personnel on the team or even within Matt Painter? Because I know that he's gone through some evolution in that time as well.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking, if you go back to the end of the 2014 season when Purdue loses 7 straight to end the season and loses at home to Northwestern on senior day, if you're telling people, hey, 2 years from now you're going to be 20-5 and you're going to be in the Big Ten at some point, or the top 10 at some point that season, and you're finally going to beat Michigan State, everybody would have been, I would assume, from your fan base, would have been awesome. Let's do that.
Right.
Like you said, it's why I was saying that I thought maybe B+ was maybe a little bit harsh. there's a lot of differences, I think, from 2 years ago. I think there's a different. I wrote about this earlier this season. Just there's a different kind of chemistry around the team, a different culture. These guys like each other more, and I worry that every time we say things like that, it seems to be dismissive of the guys who were here before, or sort of characterize them as being like bad kids. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think sometimes there are just personalities in every workplace, in every classroom, in every whatever family. Like sometimes personalities just don't mesh, but the personalities on this team seem to mesh pretty well. I think that's been a big reason why AJ Hammonds has been so good this last year and a half. I mean, he likes playing. He likes his teammates more. They get along together. They've sort of been bringing out the best in each other. They brought in a bunch of guys who are, legitimately hardworking, good kids, and that seem to be legitimately team first. I know that's kind of a cliche that's out there, but seem to be team first guys, whether that's Dakota Mathias, or whether that was John Octius last season, or whether that's Isaac Haas, who's obviously had to make some sacrifices in terms of playing time and kind of just be okay with it, because what can you say? You've got a future NBA guy ahead of you, and whether that's someone like Basil Smotherman this season who has to sit and kind of not be able to participate in the way he wants to, probably, for a team that was in the top 10 and is going to be a 20-some win team, and could contend for winning a Big Ten tournament or something like that, and he has to take a red shirt because it's better for everybody in the long run. That's maybe been the biggest difference, is that I feel like, I know it sounds trite. Every coach likes to throw it out there, but this does seem to be a team where the chemistry is important, and it's been an important reason why they're winning now when they weren't winning 2 years ago. I talked to Matt Painter over the summer, I mentioned before, and I was just asking him about that first season where he coached at Purdue and they finished last, and he said the difference was that team was supposed to finish last. That team was bad. I mean, it's kind of a team that lives in Purdue fans' hearts, I think, because they worked so hard. They people respected that. They played.
I was there for those years. Oof.
Nor was I. But it's. But for talking to other fans, like they've said that, that team was bad.
Yeah.
We respected that they went out and played hard,
right.
And
expectations were low that year. Yeah.
Right. Because they were coming off, and I know they're coming off another bad season. People knew they were in transition. But you go back 2 years ago, that's not the case. That people thought that team had talent. I think Matt Painter will say to you, that team had talent to be better than it was. That team shouldn't have been last place in the Big Ten. That was a failure on a number of levels. He took his share of the blame. Some players have taken their share of the blame, and some lessons were learned probably for people like Raphael Davis and AJ Hammonds, and they've been able to apply those over the last 2 seasons.
So who carries that culture forward after Ray leaves this season? I mean, he really does seem to be the emotional heart of this program. Who carries that forward?
Yeah, that's going to be a huge loss. I mean, I've looked at next year and thought this team should actually still be pretty competitive in a lot of the same ways next season, but that is going to be almost probably a bigger loss than anything he does, even defensively, for this team. It's just being that emotional center of the team, being the father figure for the team in some ways.
He's very dad. That's our joke, is that he's the loser dad. Not loser dad, but like he's the dad. Like he's really.
Well, he looks like a 40-year-old dad. So it kind of works out.
Well, he jokes about that too. Like he's always just kind of been an old soul. He was just an old kid. I wrote a little bit. I think about him early in the season about how he, his family and people always talked about how he was kind of an old guy, old kid growing up. So that's going to be a big loss for his team. But for that story, I remember Vince Edwards saying that he and Raphael Davis had recently had a conversation about that. With Raphael saying, like, listen, somebody's got to step up next year. It's got to be you. It's got to be, somebody else has to step up and kind of carry this forward. I could see Vince having some of that. I could see someone like Ryan Klein probably eventually developing into that kind of a role. P.J. Thompson is, I think, a guy who is vocal, and the thing is, you want the kid that's vocal because Raphael is obviously a guy who's not afraid to step up and say something, but they've got to back it up with the way that they work. So that's where it's tricky, because you've got a guy like Dakota Mathias or Caleb Swanigan, who are hardworking guys that people respect their work ethic and their teammates respect them, but those aren't very vocal guys really. So they're going to need, I think, a combination of that, and it'll be interesting to see who steps up and assumes that role.
It's interesting, the evolution of Davis, because I remember watching him in high school, and he had a well-earned reputation for being a bit of a hothead. Got himself a couple techs in AAU and playing for Southside and all that stuff, and he's really evolved to being, the adult in the room, I guess, in some sense.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not really unreasonable for someone else to take on that role as well.
Yeah. So what like I said, I've been here since 2005, but I didn't honestly follow the team that closely a lot of those years because I was busy doing my own other work duties. So and unlike you guys, I didn't have a emotional connection to the team. So I paid attention, but not that close. So when I took over and started covering the team, Painter was always raving about Raphael Davis. Like anytime you bring up Raphael Davis, all he would talk about was how hard he worked and how he was always doing the right thing and all these things. And it was odd for me for a long time because you didn't see that necessarily in the results. He wasn't really a big offensive contributor. He hadn't yet become what he is defensively. And I always kind of wonder, like, well, what is the deal with this guy? I mean, he seems like so committed to this kid. And when is it? It's not really. It doesn't seem like he's being rewarded on the court. And then obviously last year, all of that changed. I mean, he became. He took some steps forward offensively, but then what he became for this team defensively, and then the next level that he went to as far as his leadership, that and having John Octius fall in their lap at the last second. Right. That's why that was an NCAA tournament team.
You could probably write a book on the relationship with Ray and Painter. Davis committed to Purdue the spring of his freshman year of high school, and in some ways you almost think that they're similar and a lot of similar personality traits.
I think they are. I think they're both guys. Whenever someone asks me about Matt Painter, I may have even used it in this interview because I do it a lot, but he's so pragmatic. Like he doesn't. If you ever listen to his post game interviews. Or even the ones we do with him during the week. Like once in a while, he throws in some anecdotes and some fun stuff. But a lot of it is just very analytical. It's very no nonsense. It's very it's not that he won't praise his players and to do something well, but whether it was Tyrone Johnson a couple years ago or whether it was A.J. Hammonds or whether it's Raphael Davis, it's like you've got to. It can't just be you can't just talk about things. You have to follow it up with your action. You can't. You have to be all around doing what you're supposed to be doing, and I think Raphael probably identified with that a lot. I think he respects the upbringing he had with a couple of strict parents and a couple with an older brother and sister who both kind of keeping him in line too. I think he probably looked for a place where it was going to be kind of a no nonsense, honest representation from the coaching staff of what the expectations were, and people would be, like I was saying before, rewarded for the right reasons, not no playing favorites or anything like that. If you go out and earn something, it'll be rewarded. So it did seem to be a real personality fit for both sides. I mean, he's a guy that I was asking players about this earlier this season that it's hard to imagine him playing anywhere other than Purdue. Like you can look at other players and be like, oh, I could see them have ended up somewhere else. But I mean, he just is such a Purdue player in a lot of ways.
So I have a question about that coaching staff, and that kind of relates back to some of this improvement maybe that you've seen. So a couple of years ago, Purdue had Conzo Martin and Paul Lusk as their head assistants. Now, Conzo Martin is one of the hottest names, in college basketball. Paul Lusk is a successful coach at the D1 level, and that was the last time Purdue had this level of recruiting success and on the court, like tactical and development success. Now Purdue has Jack Owens, Coach Gary, Coach Brantley, and then the recently joined Ken Lowe. So do you think that this coaching staff has has that much of an impact? Because we're all assuming a lot of the big man development has come from Coach Brantley, but I don't really know. We're not in the locker room.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's fair to say. I mean, he works with those guys every day. He's working with them before the games. You see him down there, banging around and shoving them around. And then I saw it the other night. I was just down there to just sort of watching and maybe shooting a vine or something like that. And Brantley grabbing on AJ and AJ shoving him off, and you could tell he was getting kind of annoyed by it. But all those guys credit him for the help that he's given them, and I think you've seen that bear out in the development of AJ Hammonds. That's another guy that they were obviously really patient with. You were talking about sort of the patience of the freshman just at the season, but the patience that Painter's had with AJ Hammonds to bring him along from where he was, physically and emotionally and mentally as a freshman to where he is now is pretty impressive. Somebody else you didn't mention before, but Micah Shrewsbury, I think, was a big part of what they were doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Big role in getting Vince Edwards to come to Purdue.
Right, exactly. And I think he left right before. I can't remember if Edwards had committed before he left or not. I think Greg Area might have been involved there, kind of at the end of that, but it might have been post after he committed. I can't remember, but like I said, I wasn't covering the team yet, but. It's been interesting to listen to this coaching staff talk about, kind of do its sort of self-analysis of where things were 2 years ago, because all three of these assistants were on that staff at the time, and they're the ones who a Painter took a lot of the blame, but they all kind of say in terms of whether it was recruiting, whether it was what was going on, how we were teaching some things, we probably strayed from what our principles were, what we feel like. Need to be kind of our foundation for our program. So they've gotten back to it, and the results have been pretty good here the last 2 years.
Another new staff member is their strength and conditioning coach, Jonathan.
Josh Bonottle.
He posts some great Instagram videos of the team getting after it in the weight room.
That was, I think, a really big addition for this program. I mean, he's a guy who. He's a high-energy guy, and he takes his job seriously. He's also got some experience. I mean, he was with the Bulls before he came here, so he's seen a high level of basketball before and what it takes to have success at this level and beyond. And he's done some other. I mean, I know he was over. He's gone overseas to do some training with like the GPS stuff that they do. So I mean, he's a guy who's really committed to his job, and I think you see that at a lot of levels on down the line here. That there's a good support system for these players, and they talk about it too. I mean, you come here, and whether it's the video guys, you mentioned Ken Lowe and Nick Taruso, the job that the hours that those guys put in for their job, to the academic people, to just the secretaries, the people that help them on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I think there's a lot of support here for these players, and when everything else is going right behind the scenes, I think it makes it a lot easier to go out and succeed on the court too.
So we've only got you for a couple more minutes, but I wanted to ask, how do you see the top 5 of the Big Ten shaking out? And by that I mean Iowa, Purdue, Michigan State, Maryland, and IU.
That's a great question. I mean, I think Purdue is in pretty good shape to stick up there in the top 4. It would help them a lot. Obviously, if they can find a way to beat Maryland here in a couple weeks. But every indication that they should be able to finish the season pretty strong. I mean, I can't remember how many games are left now. 6 games left. So if they could finish 24-7 and be 12-6 in the league, that's a pretty good season. I mean, I think it's going to come down to Maryland and Iowa. I think it should. I mean, those are easily the 2 best teams I've seen, I think. Maryland really impressed me when I saw them in person last week. I mean, just some of the things that they can do. Iowa is obviously just a catastrophically bad matchup for Purdue twice this season. But Maryland's not a good matchup for them in some ways. I mean, it looked on paper, you look at that and you say, well, okay, position by position, it matches up. But when you see how fast Suleiman is and how some of the things that Melo Trimble can do, and I mean, it's not just a bad matchup for Purdue. They're a bad matchup for a lot of teams. I think those are both teams that you could see going a pretty long way in the NCAA tournament. So I think one of those two teams is your champion. Um, Michigan State now is probably on the outside, just having that fifth loss. It's just the margin for error is so small, and that's what happened. Once Purdue lost at Illinois, that meant it can't lose. And after it had already blown the big lead against Iowa, so you really put yourself in a situation where you can't afford any more losses of games where you kind of had things wrapped up, and then it ended up happening again against Maryland. So I guess you can't say wrapped up, but being in the lead that late and not being able to finish it off, you just don't have that margin for error anymore. So, and I don't really still know what to make of IU. I know that's probably the one that people are wanting me to say something about, and they're just such an enigmatic team because they'll have they had just this stretch where it seemed like they might be as good as anybody in the conference, and then they go out to State College and lose. And I don't necessarily know what to make of that. I mean, obviously, like Purdue had its own bad loss on the road against one of the bottom teams in the conference, but until they can really consistently defend and consistently not turn the ball over, it's hard to project them being up there at the level of Iowa or Maryland. But they're going to be playing those teams here pretty soon. They get Iowa this week, and then they get is it Iowa and Michigan State that they get?
Yeah, this are next two. It's a rough end of the season for them. Iowa twice, Michigan State, Maryland, and Purdue is going to be tough for them. I actually think they might. They're a team that, if on the right night, can pretty much beat anybody. But they can also lose to anybody on any given night. So
they're a dangerous tournament team. I mean, that makes them a dangerous tournament team is just because that offense is so explosive, even without James Blackman. I mean, people, IU fans try to say that was addition by subtraction. No, that's subtraction by subtraction. But I think they're still. I mean, Yogi Ferrell is still so freaking good. And so I don't know. They're still pretty dangerous, but I think just because of the schedule, Purdue has them. Yeah, I agree. Who do you think, Nathan? Just one of the last few questions we'll shoot at you. Who do you think will finish higher, Michigan State or Purdue? Because I think I agree the top two is going to be Maryland and Iowa.
I would say I don't. Here, let me look at Michigan State's schedule real quick so I can maybe give you a better answer to this. I mean. The one thing in their favor is after Indiana, they don't play another team. They may not play another NCAA tournament team, depending on what you're expecting from Wisconsin and Ohio State. I mean, those are both teams that are probably maybe on the outside of the bubble looking in right now, or just barely in, depending on who you ask. So, Purdue's got one game up on them, but also again doesn't have the margin for error because they play a tougher schedule down the stretch. So, I guess I would still say they're one game up. I would say they'll probably finish no worse than I would if I'm predicting, I'll say no worse than what Michigan State will finish. So I don't think they'll finish behind them. Maybe they'll finish tied, and then they'll have the tie break with the head to head, I suppose. So, but I think the way this plays out for Purdue, I think Saturday is big because you got to be able to bounce back from this emotional victory. And still be focused against a team that's pretty good, and we don't know. They may have Karis LeVert back. I don't believe he's playing tonight.
No, he didn't play tonight.
Yeah, they've said that it's sort of could be any day now that he comes back. So, that makes him obviously a lot more dangerous, and it is on the road. But I think they've shown that they can beat Maryland. Just a matter of finishing it off. They've obviously shown that they can beat Michigan, and for whatever reason, as dangerous as Indiana is, they've had their number here the last couple of years, and the matchup still, I think, favors Purdue in terms of I don't know that IU can completely match what Purdue can bring in the front court. Now it's just a matter of does Purdue take advantage of that because we've obviously seen games this year where they've drifted from it just as recently as Maryland where they're not getting the ball inside, they're not getting to the basket and putting pressure on the defense. So. I still think I guess I'm saying 12-6 or better for Purdue to end the season, and I'm interested to what that can mean for them in the Big Ten tournament because they're still a team that a lot of teams are going to have going to look forward to trying to match up against. Other than Iowa, I mean, and I guess maybe Maryland, but everybody else, I think you're going to have a tough time matching up against them when they're doing what they do well.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show and talking with us. We went a little bit over, but we really appreciate your thoughts on everything. So thank you very much.
No problem. Anytime, guys.
And thank you for listening to the Purdue Basketball Beat. We'll see you next week or whenever we decide to record again.